Okay, so we're recording.
Okay,
So Noelle, thanks so much for joining me today to talk about your story dreams in English,
of course.
and stories in general. And I thought I'd start off by asking you what you know, how you came to write this story. Very
Okay,
general question.
sure. This story is actually one of my oldest stories.
Really?
And yes, it was a story that was born during my own MFA program a little more than 30 years ago.
Whoa, wow.
And it was entitled Do You Dream in English?
Uh-huh.
And I changed it when Christina, what's her name? The Cuban writer who has a book called Dreaming in Cuban.
Yeah, dreaming
Dreaming
in,
in Cuban,
yeah,
right? I can't remember her last name. I'm so sorry. I
yeah,
I, I had
Christina.
it. I, I okay. Anyway, and that book came out around the time I was around the time I was in the MFA program
Mhm.
as a breakout Latina book, and I thought, okay, I can't. That can't be the title story then.
Christina Garcia was her.
Garcia, Christina Garcia. Yes. So my story came about as a confluence of two memories. One is of my mother who learned that who was of course born in the Philippines and learned Tagalog from her parents, but went to school and was educated by American nuns. And on her first day of school, she had no idea what things were being said, could not understand a word. They were just thrown into school. And it was a good school. It was run by the Maryknoll sisters. And they had been given an illustration to color. And so she said, make your own. The instruction was like, make your own masterpiece, color the picture. And she had no idea what to do. Things were being said to her, and she looked over at her seatmate and chose the exact colors
Hmm.
and the exact way she was coloring and copied it because she was so afraid that she was going to do the wrong thing.
Hmm.
And she was about, I don't know, 5 or 6. And so that kind of stuck in my mind. And the idea too of my husband and I, we're both Filipino, but he was much more the Tagalog person and I was much more the English person. But we've been together 30 years and now we've sort of imbibed. And he had said, what language do you think in? When we first met, we said, because he was so astounded that I was we would we would meet like foreigners and I would just launch into my what my sister calls my schmoozing, which it's not the bad. It's just to, and go cha 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 cha, and my husband, who it took him back then anyway a little while, being more reticent to get into that framework of English,
Yeah.
that he turned around after they left and I was just making small talk with strangers, the way you do, like, oh, do you have the table? Oh, isn't it hot? And blah blah blah, because I learned it from my parents, who learned it from Jesuit priests and American nuns. And so I became very fluent in that sort of hot enough for you or warm enough, or that kind of chit chat. And he said, "How do you do that? You just think in English?" And I said, "I do. In fact, I find it very difficult to think in Tagalog. I have to translate automatically. It's gotten better, of course, now that I've been a translator, but back then when we first met, and so we kind of had to bridge that. And I had that idea of, okay, if you think in English, what do you dream in?
Hmm.
And Tagalog is very much the basic love and the basic just family things like eating or drinking or biological things, which is how my parents also spoke. Whenever they had to speak about literature or argue about politics, they did not have the vocabulary in Tagalog, and they still don't. They're
Hmm.
they're trying to,
Hmm.
with the things that are going on in politics, and they keep on saying no one's going to understand me because everybody's now speaking Tagalog, and Tagalog is the language of the street,
Yeah.
and their Tagalog is so academic. So this whole idea of language came to me, and I thought about situations where that might come sort of where that might explode. And I thought about relationships, and when you're confronted with having to speak to someone who knows someone who's close to you and you don't even know who he is. So I thought about various situations like that, and the lack of control and wanting to find out things but not having the language to ask. And so that was sort of like, okay, that's the situation that I'm in. That's a situation that I think is interesting because it contributes to such a feeling of helplessness and emotional um, in a bit. I'm just a feeling of sadness really because you cannot communicate and you want to know things and you want to feel better, but nobody can help you feel better because they don't have the language to do that. And so I thought of what is the most awkward situation that you could find yourself in. And it would be something where someone who's dear to you or dear to two characters is not able to bridge two strangers. And so really, and then I just kept on thinking, okay, it's got to be dire, it's got to be hellish. And of course, life gives you all of this knowledge about what happens in hospitals. And then it also the idea that there's so many nurses in Filipino nurses in America who also don't have that medical language necessarily, but when and this always happens when I'm in a hospital. Unfortunately, I have a hospital experience where if you find a Filipino nurse, you start talking to her in Tagalog just to feel better.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, feel better in some basic comforting way and you don't want to hear the science and the and the medicine you and the scary things. You want it'll be okay, it's good, all that kind of thing, which is a simpler thing to say in Tagalog, and they're not going to talk in medical terms either. So that was the situation, and I just found these characters um because of people who were going to school at the time. I mean, they still are. They're leaving their families, and they're uh, more so now than ever. And it's a big leap for many people to come to a different country. And so basically, that's the sort of situation.
So that's, I mean, in many ways, that's a story that a lot of people could identify with, especially people who are immigrants, you know?
Exactly.
No,
Exactly. It didn't
yeah,
have
yeah,
to be Tagalog. It doesn't
no,
have to be Filipino at all.
yeah.
And that's the kind of fiction that I want to write. I started out with I mean, I will always have I actually have this idea where I probably always have a Filipino character, but I really do want to start, and I have been starting to write as many different people as I want to or I'm interested in. And this is what pushes me really to talk as much as I do to different people, because I just want to hear how they are, and how if my imagination matches up or lines up in any way. And you know what the thing is, it's frequently kind of does. People have love, and people have, and I know it's a simplistic kind of thing that at bottom we're all the same, but the thing is, at bottom we're all the same. At bottom, we care for our families, and we have love, and we have hate and anger. So I feel in many ways that people, oh, you're just simplifying it. And yes, it's true, but it's also the other is also true. That's what I think.
Well, let me
So
ask you, if I may, why did
always.
you tell it from the point of view of the father?
I'm sorry, what can I tell you?
Pablo, so why did you
Pablo,
yeah, why did you tell it from his point of view?
because the I'm always tired of the female point of view, one. So
Hmm.
I always try to go in the middle because it's more about, I find it more interesting to imagine somebody else.
Yeah, I'm the opposite. I'm so much more interested in the female point of view.
Well, but it's the same reason, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I felt like I know I can do a mother, but I don't want to do a mother. That's so corny. I mean, I really start thinking that way. And a reticent father, a, a ch-
Yeah. A what?
an adulterous father at one time.
Yeah.
And I go back to the relative, sorry, but the relatives I know, or the fathers of friends that I know, and that's the kind of character that I have, who will protect the wife, but also the wife is someone that he has betrayed, and so all of that, I thought that was more interesting to me than the mother. It's just not to say that that the mother would not have been interesting if I'd made her come along, but I felt like the father was better.
Well, he's also really closed in a lot of ways. He's got a big wall in front of him. And so
Yes.
that makes him a more interesting character because we're interested in the characters who are in conflict,
Yes, we are
not the
interested
one.
in,
Yeah,
correct. Sorry. We are interested in the characters who don't show the stuff, who don't
yeah,
show their stuff.
yeah,
And we're not interested in the ones who do.
yeah,
Because
yeah.
it's just a more exciting enterprise to look into the people who, and you can tell from the way they behave that they are, that it's painful, or that they're going through something, but they're never going to say it to you in many words or even few. And so it's just more exciting for me as a writer to go into that. So I wanted a father, because I also feel like, well, uh, I feel like the father has more pain when it's a daughter, and I know that's not true, but sort of, it's, they don't want to imagine a daughter having relations with anyone. They don't want to think about that. So there's just more
It's the
there.
other way around too. The daughters certainly don't want to imagine their parents.
Exactly, exactly. So
I have four daughters, so I can't
that's
even
right.
put my wife in front of them.
So there you go. So that's the that was the sort of germ of it. There was someone that I knew in in my husband's, he went to business school, and there was someone who had gotten sick
Hmm.
while she was there, and so I sort of just, so I mean, it comes from somewhere, and it was just a
Got sick and she
composite.
died as well. Did she? I mean, I'm asking because I want to know
Yeah.
in terms of sort
Yes, she died, unfortunately.
of.
She died. Yeah, but yes, she did
So that
die.
really came out of it. When we're writing from experience,
Mm-hmm.
it's necessarily our own experience. It's someone
Mm-hmm.
else, but that pain translates.
Of course. Of
Hmm.
course. And I did not intend to model the person, because I didn't know her that well, but I drew from other people in hospitals with terrible things that happened. And the research that I did was, meningitis is a thing, and it can be like that. And so
Yeah, for
it
sure.
became, yeah. So,
Hmm.
and there are no words, and doctors can often have no words because
Yeah.
they're not the most articulate people. And so I've actually talked to a lot of doctors, and I come from a family of doctors. So I feel like, can you have a little bit of bedside manner, for God's sakes, or have a little bit of kindness, or explain to us, because we're just freaking terrified. That's, and so that's what I was trying to translate. But yeah, the beginning, and it I didn't finish it until much later. The beginnings of that was a story in 1990. Oh no, sorry, 91, that I started,
Um,
and I sort of finished it, and then I kept on fixing it, because I there was a point that it was too maudlin, that it
huh.
was too much, and so I just tweaked it a little. And when I finally had the time and the wherewithal to do this collection, I knew it would be in the second one and not the first, of my two collections, and I said, okay, I'm gonna put that one there, because I liked it a lot, and I thought, yeah, I want that in the not so coming of age, but a little more adult Not that they were very young or anything. Not that they were very old or anything, but it just felt like an adult story.
Did you know she was going to die when you started the story?
No, no.
Did,
The only thing I knew for sure was that he would witness the character speaking. And this didn't happen. This is a scene that I totally imagined. That how will they bridge this unknowing? And he didn't like that guy. He didn't like that man. And he was like, yuck, yuck, yuck. How can this be? And how can she like him? And even reading her diary and all that. And then he speaks in Tagalog when all is when everything is going to shit. He speaks to his daughter, and he happens to be there, and that kind of goes, oh, and the sympathy and his own, and he comes out of himself because he realizes there's no way this guy could have ever learned anything like that except through his own daughter.
mm,
So and that sort of makes him realize, and he's and while he is of course destroyed by the fact that she dies, when you're older, I think that you're more equipped, a little bit better. And I certainly know that from watching my parents and our situation. They just you will confront that and feel like, okay, these people have seen more of life, and they know, and they're not as shocked, and they're not as frightened
mm.
of it. And so that was
Well,
my
it's a
story.
really lovely, shattering story.
It is a shattering it is a shattering story. It was very difficult to write. And I think I didn't even want to do it.
Why was it difficult? Emotionally?
Yeah,
Why?
yes.
I mean,
Because
I, I,
because it see on the one hand, I'm very aware that when you go to that place and are too emotional, the result isn't great when there's too much. I kept on reading it and feeling that um it wasn't it was true, but it was the language was just it was I didn't feel. I kept on going. Those last pages have been gone over, and I kept on trying to hold back, hold back, hold back, because when you say too much, then it's too much. It's almost. I mean, the only word I can think of is dramatic and maudlin. Maudlin is the word.
more
And I
than meaning sentimental.
too sentimental.
More than
Yeah,
sentimental.
yeah. I mean, obviously has to be. I mean, the minute you have a character who's sick and dies, I mean, I always have that, and it's a terrible thing to have in life. But there's someone who always goes, I'm looking at this story, and I'm like, okay, this is a story about someone dying and someone losing someone, and do I really want to do this? And that's why I found it difficult, because I knew that I'd have to tread very carefully, and I'd have to make it effective and not too sentimental, not too dramatic. And I believe in the finally that I that it succeeded, because I held back some stuff. I held back. Like, I had a longer conversation at the end.
Hmm.
Like, he said more words to prove that he could speak.
Oh,
And I'm like, oh, okay, no, 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 just
yeah,
take
it's
it
not
out.
necessary. It's
Yeah,
not necessary.
no, no, not necessary at all.
Yeah.
And then I had like, oh, I feel like I repeated, because there are two meals that they have. One, the first meal when they first is terrible, and then the second meal they start. There's a little bit of coming together more, and I think in the original draft I had three meals, and I thought, okay, that's like too much. It's just too much. So
Right.
so it's a
So
lot of pruning, I guess, tweaking.
let me ask you a bit about a bit sort of more generally about short stories. So, now, I mean, the short story probably had its heyday in the 1930s in America, when
Yes.
there were all these magazines and there was no
Yeah.
television, nothing, no social media, nothing.
Yes.
And in some ways, you could argue that the short story is a bit of a dinosaur now. I mean, fewer people read them. I mean, they're kind of, I mean, they're maybe about as popular or maybe a little more popular than the opera. Maybe, yeah, I don't know. But my question is why bother? Why read them? Why write them?
Okay. First, um, it's true what you say. Um, but every time you speak to a publisher or an agent, they say we don't want short stories, we want a novel. But the truth is that if anything, the attention span has been is just shorter and shorter now with social media and all that. In fact, Flash is having a resurgence of some sort.
Right.
So I have I have basically run the gamut of writing a 15-page story. This Dreams is a 25-page story, but I also do the 500 word story and the microfiction. I kind of do it all, short stories, and it's largely because as a mother and a working mother at that, I would try to write a novel, and I would get notes from the New Yorker, like rejection notes, and they'd say this, your prose is novelistic, your prose is novelistic. And I'm like, okay, but I don't have time. And I have that kind of personality where I want to finish something. And
Well,
so that's why I write short
well,
stories.
why should anyone read them?
I think that I still read them. So
But
I
are
still
they,
enjoy
are
them.
they, I know,
Are
but are
they
they,
antiquated, you mean, as a
well, I guess
thing?
what I'm wondering is, so, I mean, we're both writers,
Right.
and we both love short stories. So
Right.
I'm trying to get you to imagine people who aren't us for a second, people who are engineers, people who
Yes.
are going into accounting, people who are um, going to dental school, whatever. Why, and what is it in it? What's in it for them if it really has no relevance to their career?
Okay. Um, okay. That's a all right. I think that the reason people read short stories, I think that there are readers and there are non-readers first. And so, and there are many more non-readers than there used to be. In fact, and there are people who say, I don't read fiction anymore. And then you have people who read only novels because they don't like short stories. And then you have people who like short stories and novels equally. I mean, you have everybody. So what is it in it for them? A slice of life, uh, finishing something in the hour that you are in a on a drive, if you're commuting, rather than just going on and on in a novel. I also think that for those who don't want to follow a long narrative about set characters, the variety that an anthology can give you in terms of satisfaction. For instance, I still buy, especially depending on on who's editing, but I still buy Best American Short Stories. I still buy it, and my husband's like, "Oh, come on, it's already a joke that I have this shelf that just goes year, 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 year." Because I like the mix. I like that it's, oh, you have a happy story, or a story set in Africa, or a story set in New York, or a story set wherever, and then in one reading experience. I like that. I will bring a collection of short stories on vacation just to have that variety. So what's in it for them? Being entering a life, or a period from A to G, beyond which you don't know what happened. It's just that point from A to X or A to F, and just and then imagining what happens beyond it because there is nothing left. And I find that satisfying. And when I do an ending to a short story, I tend to think, when they say to me, what happened after that? Whoever reads my short story will say, what happened? Well, I don't know. So I'm only writing about, up until then. She could do this, she could do that, she could do this. I don't know, because I am only responsible for A to G, or A to H, whatever that is. And that's, for me, interesting, because the story doesn't end. It's just ending because I ended it there. That character's story can continue, and then it's a novel. If you
Well,
go years ahead, I don't. So that's my
okay, that's good. I mean, I do think though, I kind of want to
go back.
refer you back to what you said about writing from male points of view.
Ah,
Know, the fact that you are able to enter into someone else's mind in a way and
yes,
experience very different from yourself, both as a writer and as a reader, seems to me maybe to have some intrinsic value in and of itself. You know,
yes,
that I mean there are studies, uh, a lot of studies about um, reading fiction, whether it's novels or short stories, makes you a more sympathetic person, makes you more understanding of other people, tolerant, and so on. And I guess I believe that that's true, that um, that it makes you a more well-rounded person because you're able to imagine what someone thinks who is so
not
unlike
like you.
you. Yeah. That's got to do something to your head. That's not a bad thing.
Yes, but that doesn't. But that's not something that's limited to the short story. You can do that in a novel too.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Right.
But
So I mean, but the question of short stories, why short stories?
yeah, short stories give you that quick satisfaction. That's true. Um, but and that is what makes them even all the more amazing, that you can enter into someone's head for a very short period of time and be utterly convinced by it. Yeah.
Yes. And
I
that's
think
satisfying to do as a writer.
yes.
And
Yeah.
and sometimes you will make a decision not to go beyond that because, oh my goodness, I don't know. And you'll say to yours, I'll say to myself, okay, I don't know. So I'll stop here.
Yeah.
I'm not going to, I'm not, I understand him up to this point. God only knows what he's going to do next, or God only knows if they're going to stay together. I don't know, but I will stop here. So
And
that's
it's difficult too. It's
sure.
it's I mean, as you said, you wrote your story over many years.
Yes, this one. Yes.
And I read it, and when I read it, so was originally going to put another story of yours
I know,
in the
because you told
anthology.
me when I was doing that reading at NUS.
Yeah.
You said you were going to put cold in,
Yeah, your story Cold, which is
which is very autobiographical,
I
probably the
imagine
most autobiographical of all the stories I've written.
it's a wonderful story too. And I had a hard time choosing. That one is about uh a Filipina graduate student in the Midwest, and you were
I
uh
was a Filipino grad student in the Midwest teaching English.
my
Exact.
favorite scene in that story, very memorable to me, is when the couple invites you over for dinner and they kind of set you up with another Asian, or not you, but the character with someone from what, Taiwan or something, or
It was actually Korea.
Korea, yeah.
Yeah.
And and you both kind of look at each other like,
Like what?
what was this about? It was so funny.
It is. And then it's such an American setting too.
Yeah. Yeah,
To
very
have
much.
a Thanksgiving dinner and that kind of food and just the whole thing.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love it. I might give my class that story too, to compare the
Oh,
two.
that's so wonderful. That's so wonderful.
Yeah, well, I'm
Thank
a fan
you.
of your writing,
Oh,
as
thank you
you
so
know.
much.
So I think we've probably talked a lot about all this, unless you have something you want to add, that you'd
Uh,
like to know, that you'd like us to know about this story in particular. that maybe we wouldn't otherwise know?
Is this for a craft of fiction class?
No,
What is
it's
it?
for a
Okay, I
composite.
wanted to know.
It's
Oh,
for
composition.
yeah, yeah, it's for a freshman
Oh,
class.
wow. So it's are you having them write short stories?
Nope, nope. They're just
Oh, wow.
analyzing.
And you're making them read fiction.
Yeah, I know.
Wow, that's wonderful. And are they gonna write about the story like Lit Crit
I know,
or
yeah.
no? They
Sort of.
are.
But
So like
yeah.
an analysis of the short story.
Yeah.
What do I want them to know about this short story? I think that it's all in the short story.
Okay.
Honestly,
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
nothing. I think it takes the juice out of did it really happen? Did it not really happen? If you're convinced a version of it happened, that it's not exactly like that, and not exactly these people, and not exactly the situation, but it is something that happens every day,
Yes.
sadly.
No.
And I didn't even know. And it's a little bit I feel a little bit traumatized while talking about it. I didn't know when I wrote it and when I finished it and when it got into the book that I would go through this almost a similar situation
Oh
with
no.
my sister.
Oh
Yeah,
no.
so and that's sort of like it has nothing to do the two events had nothing to do with each other, but they're so similar.
Yeah.
The lack of control in disease, the
Yeah.
lack of control in that situation, and what kind of comfort a moment of connection can be even when the worst has happened. I feel that yes, it's a sad story. Oh, is there a
Sorry,
time
you
limit?
broke up there a second. No, no. I just the the it's
Glitch.
yeah, glitched for a second. So you were saying about disease and
Yeah, I'm saying that yes, it the worst thing happened, but moments of connection is what make moments of connection, a human connection are what gives us the will to go on,
mhm.
because this kind of thing is so devastating. Just like it's possible, it's very possible to just say, I don't want to do this anymore. But little moments, even the smallest moment of human connection, it helps. Even between two flawed people, even between, closed people, it helps. And I think that's something that we have to remember, because there's no other way to go through this but go through it. It's there's no other way, and it's the end of life is a reality, and I probably many too many of us have seen it in the last 3 years for all the reasons. So yeah, it's a tough story. It's a tough story to read. It's a tough story to write, but I like to think that as horrifying as the situation is, that there are still moments of not humor but just understanding and light, I guess.
Well, it is very much a universal situation in many ways, and those moments of connection, I believe, also are what fiction, short and long, are about. You know.
Yep.
Um, okay, well, thank you so much, Noelle. It's
Of
great.
course, anytime. Thank you for even teaching it in your class. That's amazing.
I've taught it before, and I'll teach it again, I'm sure.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Noelle.
Yeah, you want to stop the I wanted to could I ask you a question while I have you,
Oh, yes, let me stop
but
the
that you
recording
don't
now.
want to record it?
Yeah.